Today we're going to seal some foam. Not So Average Builder is sponsored by USAGundamStore.com, bringing the hobby to your front door. Use promo code NOTSOAVERAGE and get 10% off your next order. Hey guys, Tom here, and this is Not So Average Builder. I know that intro is a little weird, but we're going to seal some foam. So if you're ever making any dioramas or anything along those lines, chances are you're going to use XPS extruded polystyrene insulation foam. It's cheap, you can get a lot of it, and it makes an awesome base for dioramas. It is actually what we're using for the Alex. So I'm going to be using this a lot in the next couple of videos because there are a couple of projects I'm doing with diorama bases. So I wanted to show you the proper way to seal it if you wanted to follow along, and if you've been following along with the Alex build this far. You can buy this pre-made. It's called Sculptamold, but it's kind of expensive. The way that I'm going to show you how I made it, it is a lot less expensive, in my opinion. It's super easy to use, and you'll be able to seal your bases in no time. Now, one thing that I did forget to mention in this is that you need to, it doesn't like to stick to the foam very well, so you'll need to get a wire brush or some sort of brush that will scuff up the surface. You can sand the surface and it seems to do really well, but you need to scuff up the surface somehow to make sure that this homemade Sculptamold actually adheres to the base. But other than that, it's that simple. You're going to mix this stuff to the consistency of cottage cheese and go to town. Now, the thicker you put it on there, of course, the longer it will take to dry. I have run into that, and I did also find out recently that colder climates don't let this stuff cure. You'll have to bring it inside. If you work out in a garage or you do a lot of your stuff outside, this stuff will need to come in the house. You can put it in the oven. Don't turn the oven on, just turn the oven light on. That's a risk because, you know, if you forget that it's in there and you turn the oven on, then your project's up in smoke. But it's a risk you're willing to take if you're going this far. But I left mine inside for a couple of hours. I'd say probably about 12 to 14 hours, and it went from where it's moldable and smoothable to completely dry. So that was a plus. But before we get into this video, I like to say, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Love to have you hang around for a bit. This week's been kind of hectic because it is the week before my wedding. So I am stressed to the max, running a million miles an hour, but I'm excited. So I won't ramble on anymore. Let's jump right into this video. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make some paper mache. I'm just kidding. We're going to make some Sculptamold homemade. The only place that I found in the US that sells it is online, and it's ridiculously expensive for what it is. It is really hard to get a hold of. So I figured out what it is. So essentially it is just plaster with some paper pulp in it. Luke Aps has done a video on this. I don't want to waste that much toilet paper. It is a rare commodity. I'm just kidding, but it's not something I want to do. So while I was at Hobby Lobby the last time, I found this stuff. This is 100% pure white paper pulp, which is exactly what goes into Sculptamold. So this was $7 at Hobby Lobby. This was $3 at Walmart, and this was like $4 at the dollar store. So I am going to have a container that can hold my Sculptamold. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your paper and your plaster, and you're going to mix it equal levels in each. And what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to use layers. Now I did luck out, and this comes with its own little scoop, so I can scoop out what I need. But we're going to take that off for right now. Take the lid off this thing. This is actually a cereal or a flour container, so this works perfectly. Tear off the top. And seeing as this is a giant bag of this paper pulp, and I have 4 pounds of the plaster, I think I'm going to be able to make a bunch of Sculptamold for a long time. And although Luke APS's video was really simple, I think this is a tad bit more simple. It saves you from having to go and buy a bunch of toilet paper to then throw in and go through the process. I will link that video right down in the description, so that way you can go check out his video. I try and do that anytime that I use somebody else's technique, so that they get credit for it. And I'm sure he's not the first person that has done homemade Sculptamold, and I think on a couple of YouTube videos or a couple of searches I did for Sculptamold, it popped up a bunch of how to make it yourself. Well, maybe this won't make as much as I thought, but that's okay. Again, we're going to do half and half. Now, this is plaster, so don't breathe it in. A little bit more of the paper mache. When I was looking for Sculptamold, I found the only place I could find it was Amazon. It wasn't even a trusted seller, but it was like $6 or $7 for a 3-pound bag, and it's not a bad deal. But when you start going through this stuff as much as you will, when you begin to make dioramas and bases and stuff, that gets expensive. And it only has the two sides, or two sizes. The 3-pound bag, and then the next step up was a 50-pound bag for like $70. I ain't about that life. There's not many people who are about that life. This is messy, as messy gets. So just don't do it in a place where your wife or your mom will yell at you. This is why I'm doing this in my garage. Plus, it's pretty well ventilated, so I don't have to worry about dying. And if I need to add more paper, I can add more paper. Not the end of the world. I'm going to go ahead and mix this though. Actually, no. I'm going to let the container mix it. Add my third and final bag of plaster. Now, for those of you that don't know what Sculptamold is, it is a great medium for making a substrate base for your dioramas. And if I've lost you, it's alright. I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. So basically, plaster will create a substance that hardens and gives you a good base to work on, because this foam back here, although it is stiff, it isn't going to hold up to sculpting or anything like that, and it's very difficult. So you'll need a substrate to go on top of it that will allow you to sculpt details and all of those little awesome niches or things that you're wanting to put in there. And you're going to mix it up and get it everywhere like I've just done. So I would say that you probably need to use a sealed container. I didn't have one. Also, I bought this at the dollar store, so it's not, I wasn't expecting it to be, you know, the greatest. I'm going to go off and mix this, preferably not at my workstation, getting plaster all over everything, so I will be right back. Alright, so now that's mixed up, you should be left with basically powdery paper, which is perfect. And if I need to add a little bit more plaster to this, like it may not be as mixed up as it needs to be, you can always add more plaster, more paper. That's a beautiful part of this. Now the plaster was definitely the inexpensive portion of this, which was kind of surprising. I expected it to be a lot more expensive, but it was very, very, very cheap. And I would say also that if you're going to be in an area that's very humid or moisture rich, you might want to definitely get yourself a sealed container, something that won't cause any issues. But as you can tell, even after making it, I still have plenty of the paper pulp, plenty, and I still have a bag of plaster. So I will still be able to make more as I go along. It's very inexpensive. It is easy to do. I will show you what I used. Again, this was at Hobby Lobby here in the States. It's paper mache, 100% pure white paper pulp, $7. The stuff is worth it. It's made for paper mache, obviously, so you don't have to do the newspapers. You just put this on here and use your plaster water mixture. Or we made Sculptamold using this stuff and some Walmart plaster. Awesome stuff. We'll see how it goes here in a second. Now the good news is that this did not mess up how the Sculptamold reacted. I messed it up because I didn't mix it to the consistency of cottage cheese. I went way too thin and it caused it to be very runny. It may not look like it at first, but when you start spreading it onto your project, the excess moisture starts to go towards the top because that's just how this stuff does. And I did run into an issue with that. So just make sure that you don't use as much water. You want it kind of thick, but you still want it movable. I didn't understand the consistency of cottage cheese, even though I've seen cottage cheese multiple times, until I messed up the first time. And it looks more like porridge than it does cottage cheese. Also, don't be like me. Use popsicle sticks. We had bought some a couple weeks prior and I couldn't find them, and I didn't really feel like running to the store. And I had these barbecue skewers and I figured 3 of them would work. They did not do as well as I would hoped they would have. So just make sure you use some popsicle sticks. They're very inexpensive. Most of your grocery stores carry them. But just use some popsicle sticks. It will make your life a million times easier. Now, I did touch on this before, but I didn't scuff up the foam. And you can still see the foam shiny on the top. And then I do run into an issue later on. Once we get into the actual diorama, like what I used for this base, then you'll see what I'm talking about. It was a nightmare. I was able to fix it, but it was still a nightmare because it was something I didn't want to have to fix. So just make sure you take your time with this stuff. You have about, depending on the temperature, you have about 5 to 10 minutes before it starts to really firm up, and once you got about 15 to 20 minutes you can start to smooth it out. I didn't do that on this. I just kind of laid it down because I wasn't sure how it would shrink, because I'd asked a couple of people in a couple of the forums that I was in, and they were saying that Sculptamold shrinks, but the main ingredients in Sculptamold are plaster of Paris, which unless you put it on super thick, doesn't shrink. So I got confused. I just wanted to see if this stuff would work. I did put it all over the base, and I apologize for not showing you this. I just kind of do it halfway on here, but we will cover that more once we get into the actual diorama for the Alex. So you're kind of getting a first-hand view of what the diorama for the Alex is going to look like. So this has had a little bit of time to dry, but as you can hear, it's pretty hard. It is done really well. It is made of 2 ingredients. Do not mind my terrible cutting skills. There are a lot of things that I learned with this, but this stuff kind of gives it a ground texture. It may be a little too, I don't think I had everything mixed up as well. Since then I have picked up smaller cups, and I have picked up popsicle sticks, something that I thought I had but did not. So that should make this a little easier in the future. But it's that simple, just those 2 ingredients, a couple of bucks, and you can create your ground texture. Now, things like Vallejo ground texture will work. This stuff is expensive though. I think this is like 12 bucks for this big container. Oh, I'm sorry, $10.95. This was the cheapest one because it's the gray, doesn't have any other pigments in it. And it's good, don't get me wrong, but this stuff's going to get expensive. This isn't going to last you near as much as, or near as long as this stuff. And it should adhere to the foam pretty well, and it should do what it's supposed to pretty well, but in large quantity, this stuff's going to take forever to dry. This stuff took, I don't know, about 8 hours or so to dry, maybe less. I had to go to bed, so I didn't get to mess around with it much. But you can still see some paper flakes in there. So that tells me that I didn't get this mixed up all the way. And that could lead to what this hard texture is going to be. But this is pretty much the same thing as what you're going to get out of legitimate Sculptamold at a fraction of the price. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to be doing dioramas, this is the way to go. It's going to be much cheaper, much easier, and it's dried. I was worried about shrinkage, but it didn't shrink at all. These are pieces that I've broken off because they were overhanging. I'm going to end up smoothing these over now that I actually have popsicle sticks, and I'm going to fix this. But you can see how thick I put it on. I mean, it's on there pretty thick in some places, and it's dry. Solid as a rock. But yeah, that's all there is to it, guys. So if you're going to make dioramas, go out and make some of this stuff. Remember, it's just plaster of Paris and paper and pulp that I got from Hobby Lobby. You can use toilet paper. Like I said, I will link the video to Luke Aps's video on how he made it, so you can do it that way as well. This stuff is super easy to make, super simple to work with. Go out, do it. No excuses, guys. I'm just kidding. Remember, what is the most important rule in this channel? Don't be an average builder. Be a not so average one. Have a wonderful day. Bye.